Have you ever wondered if Jesus was just a myth or an actual person who walked the earth? Some folks says he's just a fairy tale, while historians call him the most influential figure ever. So what's the real story? Today we're cutting through the noise. We're looking at the facts, not just faith, because truth doesn't mind a little spotlight. Let's sort out myth from man, legend from lore, and find out why the evidence for Jesus is just too strong to ignore. Here's what we're going to cover today: the strongest historical and extra-biblical evidence for Jesus' existence, what the Bible says, and why even skeptics should care. But before we get started and rolling, go ahead and hit subscribe, like, and share, because truth deserves a bigger audience. Welcome to Why We Believe TV, episode number 9. I'm Minister Kinite Ledbetter, and I am so glad you stopped by for a weekly dose of apologetics and gospel truth. In case you're new to this channel, this platform is dedicated and committed to defending the Christian faith, also known as apologetics. So if you're a Christian who struggle with how to explain why you believe what you believe, or if you're a skeptic or non-believer struggling with the narrow claims of Christianity, guess what? You're in the right place to get real answers. Now, like I said before, the question for today is, did Jesus really exist? Honestly, for me, the answer is a no-brainer. It's an emphatic yes. But believe it or not, there's really people out there that believe Jesus is a myth or a legend on par with characters like Hercules and Horus, Osiris, Dionysus, Mithras, or Krishna, just to name a few. And just in case you're like, wait, what? Who? I got you. Let me break these myths down for you and help you understand how to determine fact from fiction. So here's the common claim. The story of Jesus is just recycled from older myths. In fact, somebody posted in the comments of my TikTok page a whole image with an outline of some of these mythical characters, basically saying Jesus is like a myth, just like them. Listen, if you haven't been over to my TikTok page, you really need to follow me over there, because it goes down in the comments with over 6,000 views and hundreds of comments, likes, disputes, and debates. It's a real conversation over there. But I'm not mad, because real truth can handle a bit of talk. Anyway, if you think Jesus is a myth or a recycled story, allow me to give you some clarity. First, we have Horus from ancient Egyptian mythology, with stories dating back as early as 2500 BC. Some say he was born of a virgin, had 12 disciples, was crucified, resurrected. But you know what the facts are? Horus was the son of Isis and Osiris, not a virgin birth. There's no ancient Egyptian text saying he had 12 disciples, was crucified, or resurrected like Jesus. Those details are modern internet myths, not part of an ancient story. Next, we have Osiris, also from Egyptian mythology, or with origins as early as 2400 BC. People claim he died, rose again, and he's called Judge of the Dead. But in the story, Osiris was killed, dismembered, and reassembled by Isis, his wife. How's that for family drama? And his so-called resurrection is really symbolic of a return from the underworld, not a bodily resurrection, and nothing like Jesus' empty tomb. Now, Krishna, from Hindu mythology, with earliest stories appearing around 1500 to 500 BC in ancient Indian texts. You know what the claims were? Virgin birth, miracles, and even resurrection. But Krishna's mother, Devaki, was not a virgin. And we know this because, according to the story, Krishna was the 8th son. So how was she a virgin? Go figure. Now, regarding miracles, one of his most popular miracles was when he supposedly lifted a mountain, the Govardhana Hill, on his finger to protect some villagers from a storm. Now, at least we do know that Govardhana Hill is a real place. But this so-called miracle comes from ancient Hindu scriptures like the Bhagavata Purana, written centuries after the events they describe, with no eyewitnesses to confirm or deny. So while the hill itself is a real place, the miracle is part of a legendary tradition, not something documented by eyewitnesses or historical records. And further, Krishna's life and death stories are nothing like Jesus. No crucifixion, no empty tomb, and no historical evidence. Then there's Hercules from Greek mythology, with stories dating back at least 600 BC. He's said to be the son of a god and mortal woman, performed miracles, and ascended to the gods. But Hercules' birth involved the Greek mythological god Zeus and Alcmene, not a virgin birth. His feats are heroic myths, slaying monsters, not saving souls. His ascension is a myth, not history, and there's no claim of resurrection or redemption for humanity. And since I'm on a roll, let's go ahead and throw Mithras in here, because y'all just love to talk about Mithras on TikTok. What's up with that? So listen, y'all, for those of you that don't know, Mithras is from Persian and later Roman mythology, with stories emerging around the 1st or 2nd century BC. Some claims was that he was born on December 25th, had followers, and resurrected. But ancient sources don't mention a virgin birth or resurrection like Jesus. Most of his supposed similarities appeared after Christianity began, and definitely not before. And finally, we have Dionysus or Dionysus, because y'all know what? I'll be here all day long because it is just so many of these mythological characters to just contend with. But listen, Dionysus is from Greek mythology, with stories going back as early as 1500 to 1100 BC. He's the god of wine and festivities, sometimes said to have turned water into wine. Sounds familiar? And he died and returned. But his stories are about seasonal cycles and festivities, not historical events or atonement for sin. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper. Do any of these mythological stories mention real places, real people, or archaeological evidence that would distinguish them as fact, not fiction? Here's the reality. Most of these myths, Horus, Osiris, Krishna, Hercules, Mithras, Dionysus, are set in the world of once upon a time, with vague locations and supernatural events and legendary characters. They don't reference real cities, rulers, or dates that match up with what we know from history or archaeology. In contrast, the story of Jesus is rooted in a real place, 1st century Judea, under Roman rule, with named cities like Nazareth and Jerusalem, and real historical figures like Pontius Pilate and Herod. Archaeology and ancient sources outside the Bible, I might add, confirm these places existed. So here's the question. How did these myths come about? Well, cultures create myths to explain the world around them, to teach lessons, or to celebrate the cycles of nature like planting and harvest, life and death, joy and sorrow. And many of these myths use symbolism and supernatural events to express deep truths or give meaning to life mysteries. Like take Dionysus, Dionysus, for example. His story isn't about a real person turning water into wine. In fact, it ain't even in a historical setting. It's a symbolic tale about grape harvest, transformation, and celebration. So if someone asks, how could a culture invent a story about Dionysus being born of a virgin on December 25th, turning water into wine, and being called the Holy Child before Jesus did these things, if it wasn't true? And honestly, you know what? That's really a good question. But the answer is real simple. Those details are later additions, period. The oldest stories of Dionysus don't mention a virgin birth, December 25th, or the Holy Child. That was all written or popularized after the rise of Christianity and not before. Cultures often reinvent old stories in light of new ones, and sometimes people read Christian themes back into ancient myths. Now let's be clear. The original Dionysus myths from as early as 1500 BC do not include a virgin birth, December 25th, or a Holy Child title. Those Christian-like elements appeared after Christianity due to a later reinterpretation or modern myth making, not from ancient sources. You know what the key differences are? Jesus' story is grounded in history with real places, real people, and real events. The myths are creative stories, but they're not anchored in history's reality. Bottom line, it sounds catchy, makes great cliche and clickbait, but they fall apart under real scrutiny. Jesus stands alone in history, not as a recycled myth, but as a real person whose life, real life, changed the world. And so now that we have mythology out of the way, let's look at history. Because even if you never crack open a Bible, history still has a voice. Tacitus, a Roman historian. And when I say that, I mean a real person that existed, not a mythological creature. And he wrote, and when I say wrote, I'm talking about in a real book that is a physical part of ancient literature that you can actually go get your hands on a copy today. Now, he wrote about Christus, who suffered the extreme penalty under Pontius Pilate. That's from his book, The Annals. Now, Tacitus wasn't a Christian. He actually called Christianity pernicious superstition. In other words, he felt like Christianity was harmful. But his opinion of this religious movement aside, he actually confirms Jesus' existence and execution and the rise of Christianity in Rome. Then there's Lucian of Samosata, a Greek satirist. Y'all know what a satirist is? It's like a writer or artist who uses humor, irony, or exaggeration to ridicule or mock real people, often in context of political or current social events. For example, like y'all familiar with Saturday Night Live, right? So that's considered satire. So their writers are satirists. They write satiric skits that mock everyone from President Trump to rapper Kanye West. But here it is. What makes these skits funny is that these are people that really exist. So Lucian mocked the crucified sage, aka Jesus, and the Christians for worshiping him. Lucian was a critic, not a believer, but he never once claimed Jesus was a myth. How about Josephus, a Jewish historian who described Jesus as a wise man and maybe even the Christ? Now, let me be real clear. There is debate over the details of Josephus' writings. Remember, he was a Jewish historian, and some believe that, his writings were touched up a bit to sound more like a Christian or a believer in Christ. And while that's up for debate, what isn't up for debate is whether or not he believed Jesus was an actual person who actually existed. And lastly, don't forget Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor, Suetonius, a Roman historian, and Marabar Serapion, a renowned philosopher. They all mention followers of Christ or events tied to his life. None of them say he was imaginary. Do you understand that to deny the existence of Jesus isn't just to question a single person? It's to dismiss the credibility of the world's most renowned historians and respected philosophers whose writings shaped everything from the way we learn and govern to critical thinking, cultural literacy, and shared heritage to how we build universities, interpret and enact law, government, and how we understand the world itself. If Jesus was just a fairy tale, why did so many ancient historians who had nothing to gain write about his real world existence as a person? Now, let's crack open the Bible, not just as a book of faith, but as a historical document. Did you know that secular organizations like the Smithsonian and National Geographic, who don't even promote any particular religion and are known for their commitment to science, research, and objective reporting, in fact, their worldview often leans toward the scientific and at times even an atheistic perspective. Yet, even with this bent, both the Smithsonian and National Geographic have acknowledged the Bible's value as a historical document. Listen, the Smithsonian has stated that much of the Bible, especially the historical books, are as accurate as any ancient records we have and are used in archaeological research. The National Geographic has published articles showing that many biblical stories, places, and people have a real historical basis confirmed by archaeology. So when organizations like this devoted to science and evidence recognize the Bible's historical reliability, that speaks volumes. Now, this historical document, aka the Bible, has what we call the Gospels, which are 4 independent biographies written within decades of Jesus' life. We've got eyewitness accounts, early oral traditions, and details that match up with history. Then we have Paul's letters, which were written about 20 to 30 years after Jesus' death, which means there were real eyewitnesses still around to confirm or deny what Paul is writing. And Paul talks about Jesus' crucifixion, resurrection, and teachings, again, while plenty of folks were still alive to fact check them. Yeah, fact checking is not something new. And then even we have Jesus' enemies, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They never claimed he was made up. They argued about his claims, but not his existence. In Matthew 23, 1-3, it shows Jesus calling them out, and they respond as real opponents. And here's something to consider. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, 2 of the most powerful religious groups in Jesus' time, they were openly opposed to him and his followers. If Jesus was just a myth or fraud, you expect them to write counter arguments, public denials, or documents exposing him as a false teacher now, wouldn't you? But here's the reality. We have no surviving writings from the Pharisees or the Sadducees during or after Jesus' life that contradict biblical accounts or try to disprove his miracles, teachings, or resurrection. And despite having every reason and opportunity to set the record straight, there's silence, like crickets. Their own writings, if they existed, haven't survived. And what we do find in later rabbinic literature doesn't deny Jesus' existence or his impact. Instead, they offer alternative explanations, but never a historical denial. Think about it. If your movement was being threatened by a false Messiah, wouldn't you leave behind a written case against him? The absence of any such countertext from Jesus' fiercest critics is a silence that leaves the case for Christ uncontested. If Jesus was a myth, his enemies would have just said he never existed. Instead, they tried to stop his movement. You know, history isn't just names and dates. It's about truth that changes the world. So let's talk about something you see every single day, our calendar. Did you know that Romans, Egyptians, Greeks, and Babylonians all had calendar systems based on reigns of kings, important events, or moon and sun cycles? Even the Jews have a lunar calendar that's still in use today for religious observances and holidays. But the world at large is based on what we call a Gregorian calendar, an entire system of dating history that is centered on the life of Jesus. And so for centuries, the world has divided time into BC and AD, or BCE and CE for non-Christians. That means every time you write a date, check your phone, or celebrate a new year, you're marking time from the birth of Jesus. Billions of people from every culture, religion, and background organize their entire lives around this timeline. I mean, think about that. Wars, inventions, revolutions, and even your own birthday are all measured in relation to when Jesus walked the earth. His life literally became the hinge point of history. Whether you're a believer or not, every calendar, every history book, and every timeline on earth quietly points to him. That's just not influence. That's world-changing impact. The existence of Jesus is one of the best attested facts of ancient history. Denying Jesus' existence is like denying Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, George Washington, or Martin Luther King Jr., except we have more sources for Jesus. Legends fade, myths are exposed, but the name of Jesus echoes through eternity, undefeated, unchallenged, and guess what? Unstoppable. So do you still think Jesus is just a story? Well, the evidence says otherwise, but the real question isn't just did Jesus exist? It's will you let his existence change your existence. So we've tackled the big question, did Jesus really exist? We've looked at the myths, the history, the evidence, and the impact. And the answer is clear. But that's just the beginning, because next week we're digging into it even deeper. We're going to ask, did Jesus really die? Because y'all do know that some opposing religions like Islam says otherwise. Yeah, you don't want to miss next week. So be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and invite a friend to join you. Drop questions and thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you, and I comment and respond to all of them. Until next week, be blessed. Mic check. Mic check. Mic got me up on the mic. That Govardhana. Girl, get this right. It's like the Brugavada. To ridicule. Ridicule.